Hello, welcome back to the second part of week 2's presentation from the ECE9013 course. In this part, we will be discussing how to implement iterations using while and for loops. So the idea is that in some cases, we would like to repeat a block of code for a particular number of times or until a specific condition is met. So, starting off with the while loop to be able to build on the previous part, the while loop repeats a set of commands or a block of code until a condition is satisfied. So in this case, the general structure is we would mention the keyword while, and then we would have a condition. So this block of code will repeat itself until the condition becomes false. So if the condition remains true, we will repeat the block of code. Whenever we reach a stage at which the condition becomes false, that's when we move on to the next part without going into the for loop, into the while loop. So for example, this block of code or program basically first has an input being asked from the user. So the condition is while this variable is set to write, we would repeat the value and ask the user to ask it to enter a new value of whether to go right or left. Whenever the user enters left, they get out of the lost forest. So you can try this example and see how the output becomes. Another way to perform iterations is using the for loop. So similar to the while loop, the for loop repeats a block of code until a particular condition is met. The difference is that in a for loop, the number of iterations is predefined. In a while loop, it's not predefined. So, for example, here we notice that we can implement the same concept using either while loop or a for loop. So for example, here we are trying to print numbers in a sequence, starting with 0 until 5. We can do this by first defining the variable n to be 0, then mention that we want to repeat this while n is less than 5. We first print n and then we increment it by 1. However, there's a much easier way to perform this using the for loop. So using the for loop, we can say that for n in the range of 5, print n. So in this case, it takes the default value to be 0 and increments by 1 until it reaches the number 5. So the general structure of a for loop is the keyword for, then there's the variable in range of another value, which typically is the number of iterations. We have a particular set of expressions and block of code to implement. So each time through the loop, this variable takes a value. First, for the first time, the value starts at the smallest value, and then it gets incremented. By default, this increment is defined to be a value of 1, but this can be, the value of the increment can actually be defined. So the range function used as part of the for loop has a structure of what is the start value, what is the stopping value, and what is the step that we would like. So depending on the number of variables that we give to the range function, we can specify what values or how the for loop works. So the default value for start and step are 0 and 1. However, these are optional, or they can be set to be any other value. So this allows for an iteration starting from the smallest value until a value of stop minus 1. So that's why if we go back to the previous example, here using this structure, we would print the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because the stop value, we actually stop at the value minus 1. So for example here, if we have my sum to be 0, and we want to add all of the numbers starting from 7 until 10 without 10 being included, we would just add into the variable my sum the value of I, and then we can print out the final output. Another example is the same thing, but we are starting with the value from 5 and until the stopping condition to be 11. However, we are specifying the step to be by jumps of 2. So in this case, we would actually be adding the values of 5, 7, and 9. One helpful command that we can use, especially in while loops, is to use the break statement. So the break statement immediately exits whatever loop it is in and skips the remaining expressions on the block code. However, note that it only exits the innermost loop. So in this case, because the break statement is in the inner while loop, it would break out from this while loop, but it would still be in the outer while loop. So using the break statement needs to be carefully considered. So in this case, we have a break statement only if the my sum value becomes 5. So you can try this out to see what would the value for my sum be. So to compare between for and while loops, in for loops, we actually know the number of iterations because we specify what is the start value and the stop value. While in the while loops, we don't know beforehand the number of iterations. For loops can end early via break. This is also applicable for while loops. In for loops, we usually use a counter. In while loops, we can use counters, but we typically don't. But it needs to be initialized before the loop and incremented inside the loop. So for loops can be written using a while loop. So any for loop can be written as a while loop. However, not all while loops can be written as a for loop. So it is important to be aware of the distinction. Examples can be found in the remaining part of this presentation posted on the OWL website. Thank you.